Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to take you on a journey into a story so shocking it feels unreal, but it is very real. It's about trust, betrayal, and the moment your life flips in a way you never saw coming. My story begins with a simple question, one that I thought would never hurt me, until it did. Daughter, aren't the $4,000 a month enough for you? Those words hit me harder than a punch. What my husband had done had shattered the world I thought I lived in. What I discovered behind that question changed everything, my marriage, my family, and me. Tonight I want to share 6 key lessons from that day, 6 truths that I learned the hard way, and 6 warnings I hope none of you ever have to learn like I did. I remember the night vividly as if every detail had been burned into my memory like fire on cold steel. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the wall clock. I had been scrolling through my phone in the living room trying to distract myself from the creeping unease I had felt all day. There was a heaviness in my chest I could not place, a weight that seemed to press down on my lungs and make every breath a struggle. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking, that maybe it was just fatigue, but the feeling refused to leave. It lingered like a shadow that followed me silently wherever I went. I glanced at the door leading to the bedroom and I could see him there, the man I had built my life around, the man I had trusted with every piece of my heart, the man I had believed loved me as deeply as I loved him. He was standing in the doorway with a smile that should have been comforting, and yet it felt hollow, empty, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. His eyes met mine and for a moment I wanted to reach out and close the distance between us, to trust that everything was still as it had always been. But a small voice inside me whispered a warning, a caution that I chose to ignore for reasons I cannot fully understand even now. I had told myself that he was kind, he was generous, he was my husband, and that was enough to dispel the faint unease settling into my bones. I had told myself that trust was sacred, that love was unbreakable, and that he would never do anything to shatter the life we had built together. But that night I was about to learn how fragile an illusion trust can be when it is built only on appearances. I had walked through my marriage with blindfolds on, eyes wide open, but seeing only what I wanted to see, ignoring every sign that should have warned me to look closer, to dig deeper, to question things I had taken for granted. I remember sitting on the couch trying to ignore the chill creeping through my spine, thinking that it was nothing, that it was just a passing feeling that would fade the moment I laughed or spoke or felt the warmth of his presence. And then he spoke the words that made the ground vanish beneath me, the words that shattered the very foundation of what I had believed about my marriage and my life. Daughter, aren't the $4,000 a month enough for you? The words hit me like a punch, like a tidal wave breaking through the walls I had built around my mind and heart. For a moment I could not breathe, I could not speak, I could not even move. The world tilted around me and I felt dizzy, as though gravity itself had turned against me. I stared at him, trying to understand, trying to rationalize, trying to make sense of something that made no sense at all. I had always thought of our life together as safe, comfortable, secure. I had thought of our home as a sanctuary, a place of trust, a place of love. And in one moment all of that was stripped away, revealed as a facade, a carefully constructed illusion that hid a truth too terrible to believe. The trust I had placed in him, that I had wrapped around my heart like a shield, was nothing but paper thin, a mask covering intentions I could not comprehend. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake him until he told me the truth, but my throat was tight and my voice would not come out. I wanted to ask how he could betray me, how he could turn something sacred into something calculated, but the words froze inside me and left only the pounding of my heart and the cold sweat on my skin. I felt tears sting my eyes and burn down my cheeks as I realized that trust is not something that can be assumed, not something that can be taken for granted. It is fragile, delicate, built on actions, words, intentions, and yet we often give it freely without questioning whether it is deserved. I thought I had known him fully, I thought I had understood his heart and mind, I thought I had shared a life of transparency and honesty. And now I understood that my trust had been granted blindly, that my heart had been handed over without hesitation, and that the person I loved was capable of actions I could never have predicted. The illusion of trust is powerful because it disguises danger, it cloaks deception, it makes the impossible seem real. I had lived inside that illusion for years, believing that loyalty and love were constants, that he would always act in ways that honored the life we shared. I had never questioned his motives, never doubted the choices he made behind closed doors, never imagined that he might treat our relationship as a transaction, as a calculation, as a system to be managed rather than a bond to be nurtured. And in that moment when the words 4,000 a month rolled off his tongue, I realized that the truth had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, but I had refused to see it. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the unexplained absences, every small detail I had brushed aside, every instinct I had silenced because love had convinced me to ignore it all. And the irony is that the deeper the trust, the harder the betrayal hits, because the higher the pedestal, the further the fall. I sat there frozen, trying to piece together the reality of the situation, trying to reconcile the man I had loved with the man I had just discovered. My mind raced through memories, replaying every interaction through a lens that suddenly made them sinister, calculated, orchestrated. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized that trust is not something that protects you from harm, it only exposes you to it when it is broken. The illusion is so complete, so convincing that you do not even notice the cracks until they widen into chasms that threaten to swallow everything. I wanted to run, I wanted to escape the house, I wanted to erase the moment from my memory, but I could not, because the truth was not going to leave me. It had settled in my bones and it demanded to be faced. I remember feeling anger rising beneath the fear, like a wave that threatened to consume me completely. Anger at him, at myself, at the world for allowing me to live inside a lie for so long. I remember thinking that trust is precious but also dangerous because it gives power to the person holding it and leaves you vulnerable to their whims. I realized that the illusion had been carefully maintained, that every action he took, every word he spoke had been designed to keep me calm, to keep me content, to keep me blind. I had been living in a carefully constructed narrative that he had written, and I had accepted it without hesitation. And now the curtain had been pulled back, revealing the machinery behind the life I thought I knew. I wanted answers, I wanted justice, I wanted to reclaim the power I had unknowingly given away. But first I had to acknowledge the truth, that trust is fragile, that it can be weaponized, that it can hide betrayal in the most unsuspecting places. I remember sitting there trembling, unable to process the reality fully, yet knowing that nothing would ever be the same. I had learned that night that the illusion of trust is one of the most dangerous forces in a relationship because it masks the real intentions of those we love and makes us blind to the signs of deception. I understood that trust is not automatic, it is earned, it is reinforced, it must be observed constantly, and even then there are no guarantees. I thought I had lived a life of honesty with him, I thought we had shared everything, but the moment those words were spoken, the illusion shattered and left only raw, painful awareness. And as the night stretched on and the house remained silent except for the ticking of the clock and the distant hum of the appliances, I realized that trust once broken cannot be restored easily, that love can be manipulated, and that the person you believe knows you better than anyone else might be capable of things you cannot imagine. I cried, I screamed, I questioned, I replayed every memory, trying to make sense of the impossible. I understood that the illusion of trust had been a trap carefully maintained for years, that I had stepped into willingly, and now I had no choice but to confront the consequences. That night taught me a lesson I will never forget, that trust is sacred yet delicate, that love can blind you to reality, and that the person you rely on the most can be the source of your deepest heartbreak. The illusion of trust can comfort you, protect you, and deceive you all at once, and it is a lesson I will carry with me forever, a warning, a scar, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that the truth often lurks where you least expect it. The moment the words left his lips, I felt the floor disappear beneath me, as though the world itself had betrayed me. Betrayal is not a single event, it is a tidal wave that sweeps over you, leaving nothing untouched, not your heart, not your mind, not the smallest corners of your soul. I could feel it creeping into every cell in my body, twisting and turning my thoughts until the life I thought I knew became unrecognizable. At first I could not breathe, my chest felt tight as if the air itself had turned against me, and I found myself gasping for something familiar, something solid, something that would anchor me to reality. But there was nothing, only the echo of those words bouncing inside my skull over and over again as though mocking me. Betrayal is louder than any scream, it is a silent explosion that fractures your trust and leaves shards embedded in your consciousness that cannot be removed. I tried to speak to him, but my voice refused to come out, as though my vocal cords had been paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the truth I had just been confronted with. I wanted to shout, demand answers, confront the man I had married, but my body would not obey, it would not allow me to act in any way other than frozen in place, staring at a reality I could not yet accept. I felt tears well up in my eyes, hot and unrelenting, burning down my cheeks as though my body understood what my mind refused to acknowledge. The betrayal was not only in his actions but in the fact that it had been hidden from me, carefully calculated and maintained over time in a way that had allowed me to believe in a life that was never real. I had trusted him implicitly, without question, without doubt, without hesitation, and that trust had been used as a weapon against me without my knowledge. I began replaying every memory through the lens of betrayal, trying to find the moment where the first crack had appeared, trying to understand when the illusion had begun to form. Every conversation, every gesture, every small kindness that I had cherished now felt tainted with deceit. I asked myself how I could have been so blind, how I could have ignored the signs that were there all along. Betrayal has a way of making you doubt not only the other person but yourself. It forces you to question your own judgment, your own instincts, and even the love you thought you felt. I felt rage building inside me, a fire fueled by the knowledge that the person I trusted most in the world had violated that trust in the most fundamental way possible. My mind raced through questions without answers. Why would he do this? How could he think that this was acceptable? And the answers were nowhere to be found, only a suffocating emptiness that replaced the warmth of trust I had once taken for granted. I remember pacing the room, feeling the cold wood of the floor under my bare feet, trying to ground myself, trying to remind myself that I was still here, still alive, still capable of thought, even as the betrayal threatened to consume me completely. Betrayal is not only emotional, it is physical. It manifests in the tightening of your chest, in the trembling of your hands, in the rapid pounding of your heart, as though your body is aware of the danger before your mind can process it fully. I felt my stomach churn with nausea and my head spin with dizziness as I realized that nothing would ever feel the same again. The person I had loved, the person I had counted on to be my partner, my confidant, my protector, had been something else entirely, something that existed alongside the truth but separate from it in a way I could not have imagined. I wanted to run from him, from the house, from the life I had known, but I could not leave because my mind refused to allow me to abandon the reality I needed to confront. Betrayal forces confrontation, whether you are ready or not, and the longer you resist, the more it festers like a wound untreated until it cannot be ignored. I remember the silence that followed the revelation, a silence so heavy it pressed against my skin, making it hard to move or think or even breathe. It was in that silence that I understood how betrayal works, slowly, subtly, insidiously, planting seeds of doubt until your entire foundation begins to crumble without warning. My hands shook uncontrollably as I reached for the countertop to steady myself, and I realized that the physical act of touching something solid was my only link to sanity in a world turned upside down. I wanted to ask him why, but the question felt meaningless because I already knew the answer. The why did not matter. What mattered was the devastation that had been wrought on my heart, my trust, and my life. Betrayal is not a single action, it is a rupture of the soul. It is the moment when the person you believe will protect you instead becomes the source of your deepest pain. I sank to the floor, feeling the cold press against my skin, and allowed the grief to wash over me in waves, relentless and unyielding. The betrayal had changed the landscape of my existence. The ground I had walked on had shifted beneath me, and I had no choice but to acknowledge it. I thought I had built a life of love and honesty, but I realized that those were illusions, carefully constructed to keep me content, to keep me compliant, to keep me blind. I felt anger at him and at myself, at the world for allowing me to live in ignorance for so long. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. The betrayal was too loud to give it voice. I felt every fiber of my being vibrating with pain, disbelief, grief, and rage all at once. Betrayal is isolating. It makes you feel as though you are standing alone on a battlefield, surrounded by enemies unseen, and every memory you trusted now appears tainted, every word a lie, every action manipulated. I tried to focus on anything else, on the refrigerator humming, on the clock ticking, on the mundane, to remind myself that the world still existed outside my torment, but the betrayal seeped into everything, contaminating the ordinary with a dark realization that life as I had known it was gone. I wanted to wake up from the nightmare, but there was no escape, no rewind, no undo. The betrayal was real and it was mine to bear. I remember curling up on the floor, rocking slightly and feeling the full weight of what had happened, realizing that the trust I had given freely without hesitation had been weaponized against me, that my heart had been taken for granted, and that the life I had built on love had been built on a foundation that could not hold under the truth. The anger burned hotter than the grief at first, but slowly it merged with a deep sadness, a mourning for what I thought I had known, a grieving for the person I believed I had loved. Betrayal strips you bare, it exposes every vulnerability and forces you to confront the reality that love can be manipulated, that people can deceive, and that trust can be taken without warning. I remember feeling the emptiness in the room, the silence that stretched endlessly, and knowing that nothing would ever feel safe again. I realized that from that moment forward, every choice, every relationship, every trust I placed would carry the shadow of that betrayal, the knowledge that the person I counted on to protect me had become the source of my deepest wound. The grief became a companion, a teacher, a reminder of the fragility of trust, the depth of human deception, and the necessity of vigilance in matters of the heart. And in that moment I vowed silently that I would never allow myself to be blind again, that I would question every word, every action, every intention, and that I would reclaim the power that had been stolen from me the moment betrayal first entered my life. I felt my body begin to relax slightly as the acceptance of truth replaced the shock. The anger gave way to determination, and the grief settled into a quiet strength that I did not know I possessed. Betrayal had broken me, but it had also taught me that even in the darkest moments, even when trust is shattered, there is a path forward, there is a way to rise, there is a way to reclaim oneself from the ruins of deception. I knew then that the rest of my life would be colored by this experience, that it would shape the way I love, the way I trust, and the way I see the world. But I also knew that I could survive, I could endure, and I could emerge stronger, wiser, and unbroken in ways I could not yet fully understand. And so I sat there on the floor, trembling, exhausted, grieving, but alive, aware that betrayal may hurt, it may wound, it may break illusions, but it cannot destroy the core of who you are unless you allow it to. After the initial shock of betrayal subsided, I found myself trapped in a storm of questions that spun around my mind without pause or mercy. Every memory I had of him, every smile, every kind gesture, every late-night conversation suddenly became a riddle, a puzzle I had to decipher, but one whose pieces refused to fit together. I could no longer take anything at face value. The world I had lived in was suddenly fractured, and my perception of him, of myself, of our life together was thrown into chaos. Questioning everything became not a choice but a necessity, because the ground I had stood on was no longer solid. I could not trust my instincts nor my own judgment, because they had led me blindly into a life that was riddled with deception. The simplest interactions replayed endlessly in my mind. The way he would ask how my day went with just enough interest to appear caring but without real curiosity. The way he knew exactly what to say to calm an argument before it escalated without ever addressing the root of the problem. Every moment now seemed orchestrated, a performance designed to maintain the illusion I had clung to so desperately. I began to scrutinize the way he laughed, the way he touched me, the way he made decisions. Everything became suspect. Even the memories that had once brought comfort were now tainted with uncertainty. Questioning everything is exhausting because it forces you to reevaluate your entire life, to revisit every choice and every assumption you had ever made. I found myself thinking back to the day we first met, the way he had looked at me, the way he had made me feel special and cherished. Was it real, or was it the beginning of a carefully constructed facade? Had he ever truly loved me, or had he been learning my patterns, observing my reactions, testing the boundaries of my trust from the very start? Every smile that I had interpreted as warmth now felt like a calculated measure of control, every compliment a manipulation of my emotions. I could feel the weight of this realization pressing down on me like a physical force. It is one thing to be betrayed in the present, but it is an entirely different thing to question the past, to wonder if the foundation of your entire shared life was built on deception. I walked around the house unable to find peace. Each room held echoes of memories that now seemed false. The couch where we had shared late-night conversations, the kitchen where we had laughed over meals, the bedroom where we had whispered promises of forever, all felt tainted with the specter of betrayal. Questioning everything forced me to confront the idea that love is not always what it seems, that people are capable of masking intentions behind layers of charm, and that the person you believe you know most intimately may hold a truth entirely hidden from your view. I started analyzing every detail I could remember. His work habits, his social interactions, his private conversations. I realized that the small inconsistencies that I had brushed aside for years were warning signs that I had ignored because my heart wanted to believe what my mind could not fully comprehend. The mind works in strange ways. It rationalizes, it excuses, it glosses over inconvenient truths to maintain comfort, to keep life manageable. But betrayal strips away that comfort and forces clarity, whether you are ready for it or not. I began to understand the importance of listening to intuition, of not dismissing the quiet nudges of doubt that I had felt over the years. Those subtle signals had been there all along, whispering a warning that I had refused to heed because I did not want to see what was real. I remember feeling a mix of grief and anger as the truth settled deeper into my consciousness. Grief for the love I had believed in, and anger at myself for not questioning sooner. Questioning everything is painful because it forces self-reflection and the realization that you may have been complicit in ignoring the signs that led you to this point. Every plan we had made together, every dream we had shared suddenly required re-evaluation. Had he ever truly supported those dreams, or had he guided them in a way that served only his own interests? Had I truly shared in the decisions, or had I been manipulated to feel as though my voice mattered when in reality it had been controlled from the shadows? The process of questioning is exhausting because it never allows for complacency. It demands constant analysis and scrutiny. I found myself lying awake at night replaying scenarios, imagining different perspectives, trying to find an explanation that could make sense of the senseless. I realized that questioning is not just about understanding the other person, it is also about understanding yourself, about identifying the places where you allowed yourself to be blind, about acknowledging the moments when love clouded your judgment, and accepting that being deceived does not make you weak but human. I began to journal every thought, every suspicion, every memory that felt inconsistent. I needed to create a record to untangle the web that had ensnared me. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to externalize the chaos in my mind and begin to see patterns that were otherwise hidden. Each page revealed more inconsistencies, more hints of manipulation, more truths I had never wanted to face. Questioning everything forced me to confront the reality that the person I loved, the person I trusted, may never have existed in the way I had imagined. I grappled with the concept of identity, the notion that someone can present oneself to the world and another privately, and that love can be engineered as a performance to elicit specific reactions. Every thought was a battle, a tug of war between disbelief and acceptance, between love and anger, between hope and reality. I realized that questioning everything is not a finite process, it is ongoing. It evolves as you uncover more truths, as you process more information, as you reconcile the person you thought you knew with the person who truly exists. I spent days analyzing emails, conversations, casual remarks that had once seemed insignificant now taking on new meaning. Every action became a puzzle piece, every word a potential clue to a hidden motive. The process was draining mentally, emotionally, spiritually, but it was necessary. Questioning everything means refusing to accept comfort over clarity, refusing to settle for illusion over reality, refusing to let the pain of discovery prevent the pursuit of truth. I came to understand that questioning everything is a form of self-preservation, a way to protect my heart and my life from further deception. It is not easy, it is not painless, and it is not instantaneous. It requires courage and resilience and a willingness to face truths that may be unbearable. And yet, through the pain, through the sleepless nights, through the relentless examination, I began to see a path forward. Questioning everything does not destroy love or hope, it refines them, it forces discernment, it clarifies intentions and strengthens the resolve to protect oneself from harm. I learned that it is okay to doubt, it is okay to interrogate memories and behaviors, it is okay to step back and evaluate the foundations of relationships. It is necessary in a world where betrayal can lurk behind the most familiar faces. Questioning everything allowed me to reclaim a sense of agency over my own life. I was no longer blindly walking through a world orchestrated by someone else. I was awake, aware, and ready to act with intention. The process of questioning had stripped away the illusion, but in its place it left clarity. It hurt. It was exhausting. It was painful, but it was also liberating. I began to rebuild my perception of him, not as the man I thought I knew, but as a human capable of choices both honorable and deceitful. I began to rebuild my perception of myself not as a victim of circumstance, but as a woman who could face reality head-on and navigate the aftermath with strength and dignity. And in that process I realized that questioning everything is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of strength, of survival, of the courage to confront uncomfortable truths and refuse to let them define the rest of your life. Through the process I discovered resilience, I discovered clarity, I discovered the power of discernment and the importance of trusting not only others but also my own instincts, my own mind and my own heart. Questioning everything became a tool, a weapon, a shield that allowed me to navigate the chaos of betrayal and emerge not broken but transformed, aware and capable of creating a life that honors my truth and my worth. I learned that questions are not enemies, they are guides, they illuminate the hidden corners, they reveal motives, they expose illusions, and they empower you to reclaim what was once lost. And as I stood in the aftermath of that storm of revelation, I understood that questioning everything is not the end of love but the beginning of wisdom, the foundation upon which I could rebuild trust cautiously, carefully, intentionally. It was painful, it was exhausting, and it left scars that would never fully fade, but it also left clarity and strength and a path forward through the wreckage that once felt insurmountable. I realized that the act of questioning everything is a sacred process, a necessary confrontation with reality, and that through it I could survive, endure, and ultimately thrive beyond the shadow of betrayal. The moment came when I realized I could no longer avoid the inevitable. I had to confront him and face the truth in his eyes, no matter how terrifying the task, no matter how painful the revelations would be. The confrontation was not just about asking questions, it was about demanding answers, holding him accountable for the breach of trust that had shaken the foundation of our lives. I remember standing in the doorway of our bedroom, my hands trembling, my chest tight with anxiety and fear as I watched him sit on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone with the same calm demeanor he had always worn. The calm that had once been comforting now felt like a mask, hiding something dangerous, something calculated. I cleared my throat and the sound cracked in the silence like a whip. I wanted him to look up, to meet my gaze, to understand the gravity of what had been done, but he did not at first. He continued scrolling, his eyes flicking across the screen as though nothing had changed, as though nothing could possibly have changed the life we had built together in an instant. I felt a surge of anger rise within me, a fire fueled by the betrayal, the lies, the illusion that had been carefully maintained for years. I demanded that he put the phone down and face me, and he finally did, slowly lifting his eyes, meeting mine with a calmness that made my stomach twist, because it was the same calm that had lulled me into trust for so long. I asked the question that had been burning in my chest for days: what did you do? Why did you do it? Why would you betray me in such a way? His response was measured, careful, too calm, and it sent a shiver down my spine. The explanation he gave did not feel human, it felt rehearsed, carefully designed to deflect, to manipulate, to maintain control of the narrative, and it revealed not remorse, not empathy, not love, but a calculated disregard for my pain. I remember my hands shaking as I held them out, demanding honesty, demanding clarity, and yet every word he spoke seemed to deepen the chasm between us. Confrontation is terrifying because it forces you to witness the truth directly. It does not allow for escape or denial, it strips away illusions and leaves only raw reality. I felt tears well up in my eyes, hot and stinging, and yet I refused to let them fall because I needed to remain present, to hear the answers I had been seeking. The room felt heavy, as though it absorbed the tension, the unspoken emotions, the rage, the heartbreak that radiated between us. I realized in that moment that confrontation is not just an act, it is an experience, it is a test of endurance, courage, and clarity. Every response he gave I dissected mentally, analyzing the tone, the choice of words, the pauses, the emphasis, trying to detect sincerity in a voice that had been capable of deception for years. I wanted to believe in the man I had loved, the man I had trusted, but the confrontation stripped away hope and replaced it with a painful awareness of reality. I remember pacing the room as he spoke, trying to absorb the magnitude of what I was hearing, trying to understand why the person I had trusted so completely had chosen deception over honesty, over loyalty. The anger surged and ebbed in waves, crashing over me and receding, only to return stronger with each revelation. I felt the floor beneath me tremble, not physically but emotionally, as if the entire world had shifted and I was caught in the center of a storm I could not escape. I asked again and again questions that seemed endless, and he responded with measured calmness, deflecting, shifting, justifying, yet never fully owning the breach that had changed our lives forever. I realized that confrontation is both necessary and excruciating because it forces you to see the other person fully, to witness their humanity or lack thereof, and to reconcile that with the person you thought you knew. I remember moments when I wanted to scream, when I wanted to run, when I wanted to collapse under the weight of the truth, but I stayed because I needed to see it through to the end, to confront every lie, every hidden action, every manipulation that had brought us to this point. The confrontation revealed more than just his actions, it revealed his character, his priorities, his values, and the stark reality that trust can be shattered by the very person we believe is our protector, our partner, our safe harbor. I felt my heart pound as I processed every word, as I measured every implication, as I assessed the impact on our family, on our shared life, on myself. Confrontation is a mirror. It forces you to look directly at what is hidden. It forces recognition of truth whether you are ready or not, and in that moment I could see clearly the depth of his betrayal and the necessity of facing it fully. I remember the silence that followed the last of his explanations, the heavy quiet filled with unsaid words, filled with tension, filled with the gravity of revelation. I stood there breathing hard, trying to steady my racing heart, trying to reclaim some sense of control in a situation that had been turned upside down by deceit. The confrontation taught me that honesty is not just speaking the truth, it is facing the consequences of truth, it is allowing oneself to be vulnerable, it is acknowledging the pain caused and taking responsibility fully without deflection or manipulation. I realized that confrontation is as much about self-assertion as it is about uncovering deception. It is about claiming space, demanding respect, and refusing to allow the actions of another to dictate your perception of yourself. I felt a sense of empowerment mixed with grief, a strange duality that left me raw yet strengthened. Confrontation forces clarity, and clarity is a weapon against manipulation, against control, against betrayal. I remember the feeling of standing tall despite the fear, despite the heartbreak, despite the uncertainty, and knowing that I would not back down, that I would demand answers, that I would no longer allow illusion to dictate my life. The act of confronting him was terrifying, but it was necessary. It was the only path to understanding and reclaiming my sense of agency. I realized that confrontation is not a one-time event, it is a process. It requires patience, observation, analysis, and unwavering commitment to truth. I observed his every gesture, every micro-expression, every pause, every word, and I understood that through confrontation I could finally see him fully unmasked. I felt a mixture of sorrow and anger as I recognized the consequences of deception, the fragility of trust, and the importance of boundaries. I understood that confrontation could not erase the past, but it could shape the future, that it could establish limits that would protect me and demand accountability. I remember the exhaustion that came after the confrontation, the shaking limbs, the heavy eyes, the aching heart, and yet beneath the fatigue there was a sense of triumph, a quiet assertion that I had faced what needed to be faced, that I had demanded answers, that I had seen the truth and refused to allow it to be hidden. Confrontation is transformative, it is terrifying, it is painful, and yet it is empowering because it forces truth into the light and allows you to reclaim control of your life. I left that room with my head high, my spine straight, and a heart aware of the reality before me, a heart that knew the strength required to demand accountability and the resilience to endure the emotional aftermath. I understood that the confrontation would not end here, that it would echo in my mind and in our lives for months, perhaps years, but I had taken the first step, I had faced the shadow, I had demanded truth, and I had survived. The lesson of confrontation is that it is not easy, it is not quick, it is not painless, but it is necessary, because only through facing the truth directly can we begin to heal, to rebuild, to reclaim what has been taken by betrayal and deception. And in that knowledge I found a spark of power, a recognition that even in the presence of the deepest hurt I could stand firm, I could demand honesty, I could insist on accountability, and I could continue forward unbroken in my commitment to myself and to the life I still had the power to shape. After the confrontation I realized that the power I had given away over the years had never truly been gone, it had only been dormant, waiting for me to reclaim it, to recognize that my worth and my voice were not determined by anyone else but me. Reclaiming my power was not a simple act, it was a journey, a process that required me to look inward, to confront the fears, the insecurities, the self-doubt that had allowed the betrayal to penetrate so deeply. I had lived for so long believing that love meant submission, that trust meant compliance, that loyalty meant silence, and I realized in that moment that none of those things were true, that true power comes from within, from acknowledging your own value, from refusing to allow the actions of another to define you. I began small, at first asserting my opinions in ways that had once felt impossible, speaking up about things that mattered to me, setting boundaries I had never dared to set. Every word spoken, every decision made without seeking approval became a declaration, a reclaiming of space that had been ceded over time. I felt strength building within me, like a flame slowly igniting and spreading through every part of my being, warming the cold places, the dark places that had been bruised by betrayal. Reclaiming power meant understanding that anger and grief were not weaknesses but tools that could fuel transformation if channeled wisely. I allowed myself to feel fully, to experience the emotions that had been suppressed, to confront the pain without allowing it to dominate my existence. Every tear shed, every scream uttered into the emptiness of my room was an affirmation that I was alive, that I was capable, that I had the right to demand respect from myself and others. I began to recognize the patterns that had allowed manipulation to take root, the moments when I had ignored my intuition, the times when I had excused behavior that did not serve my dignity. Reclaiming my power meant reclaiming my awareness, my discernment, my ability to evaluate every interaction through the lens of truth rather than illusion. I started establishing new rules for myself, refusing to accept explanations that did not satisfy the deeper questions that had been raised by betrayal. I refused to let monetary gifts or gestures of convenience override the fundamental requirement of honesty and respect. I began to see that reclaiming power also meant taking responsibility for my own choices, acknowledging where I had allowed myself to be vulnerable without compromise, and understanding that my life could no longer be dictated by the actions of someone else. I began to set clear boundaries around what was acceptable and what was not, what I would tolerate and what I would not. I realized that boundaries were not walls to isolate myself from others, but shields to protect my heart from further harm. Every decision made within those boundaries became an act of empowerment, a conscious choice to prioritize my own well-being and self-respect, above the desire for comfort or fear of conflict. I started rebuilding my daily life with intentionality, refusing to be passive in situations that had once left me silent. I spoke up in conversations that mattered, I voiced opinions that had been suppressed, I asserted needs that had been ignored. Each act of self-assertion strengthened my sense of self, validated my existence, and reinforced the understanding that true power cannot be given, it can only be recognized and embraced. I began to reclaim my relationships, evaluating each connection through the lens of respect, honesty, and mutual care. I distanced myself from interactions that eroded my confidence and nurtured those that supported my growth. Reclaiming power was not about punishment or retaliation, it was about creating a life where my autonomy, my voice, and my dignity were honored and protected. I found that with every decision made in alignment with my values, with every boundary respected, with every assertion of truth, I felt lighter, freer, more capable of facing the world with clarity and purpose. I realized that reclaiming power also meant reclaiming my narrative, refusing to allow the betrayal to define who I was or how I would move forward. I began telling my story not as a victim but as a survivor, as a woman who had faced deception head-on and emerged stronger, more aware, more resilient. Every word spoken to myself or others reinforced the sovereignty of my mind and heart, the inviolability of my inner world. I began to understand that reclaiming power is a continuous practice, a daily commitment to honoring oneself, to refusing to accept subjugation in any form. I learned to trust my instincts again, to listen to the quiet voice within that had been ignored for too long, to recognize that my intuition is a guide and protector when nurtured and respected. I began to take control of the aspects of my life that I had allowed to be manipulated, to make choices deliberately, intentionally, consciously, in alignment with my values. Reclaiming power is not always easy, it requires courage, patience, and persistence. It demands confronting uncomfortable truths, acknowledging vulnerability, and refusing to allow fear to dictate actions. I realized that the more I reclaimed, the more confident I became, the more assertive I became, the more my life shifted in ways that aligned with my authentic self. I began to make plans for the future with a clarity that had been obscured by deception, the vision of a life built on integrity, honesty, and self-respect guiding every step. Reclaiming power also meant forgiving myself for the moments of blindness, for the times I had accepted less than I deserved, for the years spent in trust that had been betrayed. Forgiveness was not for him, it was for me to release the hold of resentment and pain that threatened to consume my own growth and peace of mind. I began to recognize that power is not domination, it is not control over others, it is mastery over oneself, it is the capacity to navigate life with awareness, courage, and dignity even in the face of betrayal. I discovered that every step taken in self-assertion, every boundary enforced, every truth spoken aloud reinforced the strength that had always been within me, that had only been dormant, waiting for the catalyst to awaken it. Reclaiming power meant taking back my identity from the shadow of deception, understanding that my worth was inherent and independent of the actions of another. I felt a growing sense of liberation, the sensation of stepping into my own agency, the realization that I was capable of shaping my life according to my own values and priorities. I understood that reclaiming power is both an internal and external process. It manifests in mindset, choices, actions, and relationships. It transforms how you engage with the world and how you honor yourself within it. Each day became an opportunity to exercise that power, to reinforce my autonomy, to solidify the boundaries and values that define me. I began to live intentionally, refusing to be passive in the face of manipulation or compromise, refusing to accept less than the respect and dignity I deserve. I embraced the discomfort that comes with change, the uncertainty of forging a new path, because I understood that true power cannot exist without challenge, without struggle, without courage. Reclaiming my power became a declaration, a daily practice, a commitment to myself and my life. I realized that no betrayal could take it from me once I had acknowledged and embraced it fully. And as I moved through the days with intention, clarity, and resilience, I felt a sense of pride and strength that I had never experienced before, the knowledge that I had faced deceit, faced fear, faced heartbreak, and chosen to rise above it, to claim the life and self-respect that were always mine to hold. I understood that reclaiming power is not the absence of vulnerability, but the mastery of it, the ability to acknowledge pain, fear, and grief, and yet act with clarity, courage, and conviction. Every choice I made reinforced the sovereignty of my mind and heart, every action a reaffirmation that I was no longer passive, that I was awake, aware, and fully present in my own life. Reclaiming power transformed my relationship with myself, with the world, with love, with trust, and with life itself, and it set the stage for a future built on strength, dignity, and unwavering self-respect. After reclaiming my power, after standing tall and asserting my worth, I realized that the most important lesson was not only about confronting betrayal or establishing boundaries, but about what comes next, about moving forward and building a life that honors my truth and my values. Lessons learned are not simply memories of pain, they are the foundation for transformation, for wisdom, for resilience and hope. I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point, the shock, the heartbreak, the confrontation, the reclamation of power, and I realized that each step had been preparing me for this moment of clarity, of awareness, and of determination to live fully and authentically. Moving forward does not mean forgetting the past, it does not mean excusing the betrayal, it does not mean pretending the pain never existed. Moving forward means integrating the truth into the story of your life, understanding that while the past shapes you, it does not define you unless you allow it to. I began to approach each day with intentionality, choosing actions that reflected my core values, that honored my worth, and that refused to allow past betrayal to dictate my future. I developed a clarity of vision, a sense of purpose that had been clouded by deception for so long, and I recognized that this clarity was a gift born out of pain, a lesson I could not have learned any other way. I embraced the understanding that every experience, including the most harrowing ones, carry within them the seeds of growth and self-awareness, if only we have the courage to face them fully. I realized that moving forward requires courage, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of fear, to step into the unknown with resolve and trust in your own strength and wisdom. I began to set goals for myself, not based on the expectations of others, not dependent on approval or validation, but guided entirely by my own vision of what a life of integrity, dignity, and fulfillment should be. Each decision I made became an affirmation of my autonomy and my commitment to honoring myself. I recognize that lessons learned are not static, they are living principles that guide every choice, every interaction, every step forward, and that by integrating these lessons I could navigate life with greater discernment, clarity, and resilience. I reflected on my relationships, understanding that the people I allow into my life must align with the respect, honesty, and values that I now prioritize. I became more selective, not out of cynicism but out of wisdom and a commitment to protect my energy and my peace. I understood that moving forward also requires forgiveness, not for the person who betrayed me but for myself, for the times I doubted my instincts, for the moments I ignored the small warnings, and for the years I had spent blind to the truth. Forgiveness became a tool not of weakness but of liberation, a way to release the hold of resentment and grief that could otherwise keep me tethered to the past. I allowed myself to grieve fully, to feel the pain deeply, and yet I refused to let it paralyze me. I understood that the lessons learned from betrayal are not merely about recognizing deceit but about cultivating strength, courage, self-awareness, and resilience that will guide me in all aspects of life. I began to trust my intuition again, to listen to the quiet voice within that had been ignored for too long, and to honor it as a compass for decision-making and for understanding the intentions of those around me. I embraced the idea that moving forward requires balance, the willingness to be open to love and trust again, without naivety, without ignoring red flags, without surrendering my autonomy. I realized that my capacity for love and trust had not been diminished by betrayal, only refined, that I could engage fully in relationships with discernment, wisdom, and courage. I began to take deliberate actions that reinforced my commitment to myself and my life. I established routines that nurtured my mental, emotional, and spiritual health. I invested in growth and self-development. I surrounded myself with people who reflected the values I now held dear. Moving forward meant reclaiming my narrative, telling my story not as a victim but as a woman who had faced deception head-on and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I embraced my own agency, understanding that my life was mine to shape according to my own principles and vision. I reflected on the lessons learned and how they applied not only to relationships but to all areas of life, understanding that integrity, accountability, courage, discernment, and self-respect are universal principles that guide actions, decisions, and interactions across the spectrum of human experience. I realized that moving forward requires patience with myself, patience with others, and patience with the unfolding of life, understanding that transformation is a process that cannot be rushed, that growth emerges over time. Through reflection, action, and resilience, I embraced the understanding that the power to create a fulfilling, authentic life lies within me, and that by integrating the lessons learned from betrayal and heartbreak I could navigate challenges with confidence, wisdom, and courage. I began to plan for the future with intention, creating a vision that was rooted in my values, that prioritized my well-being, and that refused to allow external circumstances or past pain to dictate the trajectory of my life. I recognized that the ultimate lesson is that life continues even after betrayal, even after heartbreak, even after deception, and that we have the choice to engage fully in life, to reclaim joy, fulfillment, and purpose regardless of what has happened. I learned that moving forward is not linear. It is filled with moments of doubt, moments of reflection, moments of action, and moments of pause, but that each step taken with awareness and courage builds momentum toward a life of authenticity and empowerment. I embraced the knowledge that I am capable of resilience, of growth, of transformation, and that the challenges I have faced have prepared me to live more consciously and intentionally than I ever have before. I recognize that lessons learned must be integrated, not only understood intellectually but embodied in choices, actions, interactions, and in the cultivation of inner strength and wisdom. I approached every relationship, every opportunity, every challenge with the clarity, awareness, and discernment that betrayal had forced me to cultivate, understanding that I could engage fully without compromising my integrity or surrendering my power. I began to celebrate my progress, appreciating the strength, courage, and resilience that had brought me to this point, understanding that every step forward is an affirmation of my worth and my capacity to shape a life aligned with my values. I realized that moving forward is not forgetting, it is not excusing, it is not diminishing the impact of past pain, it is choosing to engage with life fully armed with the lessons learned and the clarity gained. I embraced the understanding that the most profound lessons emerge from the darkest moments, that heartbreak can cultivate strength, that betrayal can teach discernment, and that survival is not simply endurance but transformation. I began to see the world through a lens of wisdom and clarity, understanding that the experiences that once caused devastation could now guide me toward empowerment and authenticity. I realized that life is a series of lessons, each one an opportunity to grow, to refine, to reclaim, and to rise stronger than before. I embraced the future with courage and confidence, understanding that the lessons learned from betrayal would serve as a compass guiding every choice, every relationship, every pursuit of fulfillment and joy. And in that realization I felt a profound sense of peace, a recognition that while I cannot change the past, I can shape my future with intention, awareness, and integrity, that I have the power to build a life of authenticity, self-respect, and unwavering strength, and that no betrayal, no heartbreak, no deception can ever take that from me, because it resides within me where it has always belonged.